10. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's lectures. We're not going to be drowned out with rain today by the looks of it. It's a magnificent day. And the title to our lecture this morning is Child Nutrition. And whenever you look at child nutrition, I think it's important to look at everything surrounding children, surrounding the way they're raised, the way they're treated for illness, the way they're fed. That I think all of that is of the utmost importance, because we are what we are today, partly because of what happened to us as children. So we are a combination of not only our genes, but also environment in utero, birth, how we were raised, how we were fed, where we were raised. All of that comes together to make us who we are today. And if it was all atrocious, the good news is that even though we might not have had the right conditions growing up as children, that the body is constantly being remade, and as we'll see on Saturday morning, you can rewire the brain. So that's the good news. But ideally, the children are given the best conditions for healing, because that gives an amazing kickstart to life. So before we begin, I'd like to say a word of prayer. Father, thank you so much for the basic principles to give this amazing body that you created with an inbuilt ability to heal itself. Give us wisdom and understanding this morning, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. I first was confronted with children and raising children when I was when I was single, before I had babies. And I was a nurse, and we lived in a big house. And in that big house, it was a big old house, there were several different rooms, and there were about, I think, 4 or 5 nurses all living in the house. And there was a single mum there with a little baby. And I'd get up in the morning, and I've always loved babies, and that little one would be crawling along because the mother was still asleep. And such a beautiful baby, and I'd go to pick him up and oh, the smell. I don't know whether that little one had had a change for a long time. And then I'd often see the mother trying to change the diaper, and she'd have a chocolate biscuit to give the child to try and calm him down so she could change his diaper. So I was confronted with, dear, this is not the right way to raise babies. And really the best time to begin giving the baby the right conditions is even before conception. In fact, some health writers are saying that the couple should go on a detox and a cleanse and get their eating habits correct before they even conceive. And when you hear on Monday when we talked about genetics, you can see why that is so. And I did mention too on Monday that one writer claimed that parents are the genetic engineers of their children. And so ideally that's what happened, but the ideal doesn't always happen, and that's why we're so glad that God gave us a body that can adapt and adjust at any stage. Very important too that not only are the parents united in the way they eat, but that the parents are united in the way they raise their children, because that is of the utmost importance for happy children to have a united front. So birth should be natural. Ideally, birth should be done at home. Not everyone's comfortable with that, but I can tell you right now, I'm not very comfortable with hospitals. And I have a friend who was a midwife. She had all her babies at home after what she'd seen in hospitals. And the country with the highest infant death rate in the world is America. And this is not just because of intervention at birth, but it's also from the vaccines that children are getting. Children are getting something like 10 times the vaccines in the first year compared to 40 years ago. And so these are some of the influences. Again, this is something to be assessed and addressed, ideally before the lady even falls pregnant. Because, again, we are what we are because of all of these situations. Dr. John Clark, he's an American doctor who's spent quite a bit of time in Australia. He gives meetings showing the links between autoimmune diseases that people have in their 40s, 50s, and childhood vaccinations. One of the problems, and one of the many problems with childhood vaccinations is the neurotoxins that are in the vaccines. And every parent that vaccinates their children vaccinates their child because they want the best for their children. Isn't that true? So if people say to me, should I vaccinate? I always say, I'm not going to tell you what to do. But if I were you, I would investigate. And if you go to the chemist and say, give me a printout of what's in those vaccines, you would be very surprised. Very surprised. And you've got to make that decision. Do I want this to go into my child? And that influences very much the development of the child, not only their brain, but their digestive tract, every part. So very important, again, that parents become informed. They become informed as to birth. And I'll tell you what happened 3 days ago. My grandson, my eldest grandson's 24, and his wife's due to have a baby. So she's getting monitored, as many do, and they found that her blood pressure had gone a little high, and she'd put on 9 pounds in 1 week, and they said, we need you to come into hospital, we need to monitor you. So they gave her a suppository, which if the body's ready to birth, it'll bring on birth. Well, they did that to her 5 times over about 5 hours, but nothing really was starting to happen. So they put this little balloon inside of her and blew it up. She screamed with the pain because that apparently will bring on labour. They did that to her twice, to the point where she looked at my grandson and said, I'm not having my next baby in hospital. And then the nurse came in and said, we're going to set you up and inject oxytocin, which will bring the labour on. And my daughter was there and said, excuse me, we're going to have a family conference here. So my daughter Emma said to them, if I were you, I'd go home. Blood pressure's stable. Baby's stable. The poor girl was worn out because every half hour they're taking her blood pressure. How can you sleep when every half hour? And she's about to go into labour. I would like to suggest if they'd gone ahead with that, it would have ended up probably an emergency caesarean. So they went home. Well, this last night was her 3rd night at home, having a great sleep. She hasn't gone into labour yet. My daughter Jessica, who had all her babies at home, she said, the cervix is like a peach. And if a peach is ready to eat, you just touch it, it falls into your hands, and then you eat it. It's the most beautiful peach you ever tasted. It was ripe and it was ready. And it's the same with the cervix. We've got to wait till it's ripe. We've got to wait till... And so we're hoping that before the end of these meetings, I'll be able to announce that a baby's been born. Maybe so, maybe not. It's trusting the body, trusting that it knows what to do. I would say most of my babies came late. And what's happening also today, if a lady goes a week over, then they say, we have to put you into labour. Trust the body, especially if all body symptoms and signs are working well. I mention this because birth is so important. Birthing naturally is important. In most Australian hospitals today, they have a birthing centre attached, so you can have almost like a home environment, because birth is not a sickness. It is not a sickness. It is a very natural occurrence. And I found it interesting with my girls. They all did home births. Well, one did her births in the in the little house next to it, like a birthing centre, and they all birthed naturally. But you know what? My girls all grew up with wonderful birth stories. So they had no fear in their minds. They had no fear because they'd grown up with great stories about the miracle of birth. It's an incredible thing, isn't it? And it's very important that both the man and the woman be trained, educated in birth, so that as they go through this process, they can work with the body and then let the baby naturally be born. So that's the first step. A man emailed me. He was in hospital with his wife. She just had a baby, and he said, "Barbara, the milk hasn't come in. What do we do? Do we have to give the baby formula?" I said, "When was the baby born?" 2 days ago. I said, "Are you in a maternity hospital?" "Yes." I said, "Hasn't anyone told you the milk doesn't come in for 3 days?" He said, "Doesn't it?" Poof, they're in a maternity hospital. But those first 3 days, there's a thick colostrum substance that's called colostrum. And that is vital to the building up of the baby's development, and also the baby's immune system. I was talking to a farmer, and he's a dairy farmer. He said, if a cow dies in childbirth, he said, we squeeze the teats so that that calf gets some colostrum, and then we're looking for a cow that's just had a calf, and we put that calf onto that mother, because if that calf does not get colostrum, we may as well put that calf down, because that calf will never be strong. Let's take that to babies. Ooh. That's why I said we are what we are, because of everything that happened right there back in the beginning. So the best milk for baby is breast milk. Now, something that's happening with a lot of babies today, in fact, I hardly heard of it when I had babies, and my youngest is probably 36, my oldest daughter is 47, and I never heard of this. A lot of babies have tongue tie. And I was reading that in the old days, a midwife always let her thumbnail grow long and sharp. And when the baby was born, if she noticed a tongue tie, she just quickly slit it. My son's baby had tongue tie. I was there, the baby was only 2 months old, and I could tell by the way he was feeding something was not right. It cost him $1,500 to get that tongue tie just nicked. So if the baby's not feeding well, there's some of the things that need to be investigated, and sometimes it's just a little bit of skin that holds that tongue down, and sometimes it can be a little bit of skin on the top lip, and sometimes that just needs a little slit. Some people ask me about circumcision for boys. I say that's your decision. That's the couple's decision. I thought it was a barbaric thing to do, and I didn't do my boys. And 26 years ago, I married Michael O'Neil, and he's very strong on circumcision. And so if I had been married to Michael at the time, I would have submitted to what the man wants, because, you know, I'm a lady, I don't have one of those things, it's a man's thing, so I basically leave it up to the man. So I leave that up to the couple. It's a personal decision, but that's my experience with it. And so now we're looking at breast milk. Breastfeeding is an art, and a lot of young mothers do not know how to breastfeed. And there's a way to breastfeed that makes it a lot easier for the baby and a lot easier for the nipple. And the baby should be looking at the nipple like this. Got that? And then the mouth doesn't drag on the nipple. But if the baby's all bound up with the head like this, that drags the nipple, and the nipple can get very, very sore. So if the baby is feeding on the left side, the baby's right arm should be behind the mother, and the left arm in the front. So basically feeding like this. That makes it a lot easier. My last few babies, I would just feed them one side at a time. And I found that that made it a lot easier on the nipples, that the nipples are getting a 4 or 5 hour break because one nipple is used and then there's a big break to the other one. So that's also a great idea. And I've met some veteran mothers who are saying the same thing. And I found that when my babies, you know, the first probably couple of months, I fed them every couple of hours. So about every 2 hours I would feed my baby. And I found that worked well. I found that by the time they were the ripe old age of about 3 months, it was starting to be about 3 hourly feeding. I found that if you, and I've seen this with mothers, feeding too often, the baby doesn't get a full feed, and then the baby gets hungry again quickly. So ideally, let the baby have the full feed and let it have a break. I used to do everything possible to keep that baby happy, because it's so easy that the minute the baby peeps, just put it on the breast, just put it on the breast, just put it on the breast. That let the baby's tummy have a little bit of a rest. Ideally try not to feed more than 2 hourly, and ideally 3. Some babies will even go 4th hourly, but my babies didn't seem to be able to do that. So I would feed them every 3 hours. One lady said to me, but when do they sleep through the night? I said, well, my babies would sleep through the night at about 2.5 years. So what I did was I just slept with them. And when they woke, I just stuck them on, and I think I was asleep before they were. But not every mother is comfortable with that. You have to do what you are comfortable with. So breastfeeding is the best. But for some reason, some mothers, in fact, I had a girlfriend, her nipple was a lot longer than most nipples, and the roof of her baby's mouth didn't have a nice curve in it, and her baby could not breastfeed. So that was an unusual situation. But what she did was she would express, and then she would feed the baby. I know that if a mother is highly stressed, that can interfere with it. Do you know, in many cultures, the mother didn't leave the home for 3 months. For 3 months, the aunties would come in and help with the house and help with, this is in little communities. It's so different today. You see, where I live, my closest child is 5 hours away. I've got 2 daughters in Tasmania, that's a flight away. I've got a few up in Brisbane, but in the old days, people were sort of more stayed in their own little towns, and then it was more a community, and people had help. So that can't always happen, but wouldn't that be nice? And it just allows the mother time to settle into feeding, and keep it as relaxed as possible, because that does affect the milk if the mother's highly stressed. And I used to get the Nursing Mothers Association newsletter, and that really helped. I used to go to nursing mother meetings I think they'd have them every month, and that really helped. And I remember reading in the Nursing Mothers newsletter how as long as you keep the area where a visitor will come in tidy. And they also, because sometimes I could hardly get the washing or the dishes done in a day. Sometimes the baby's a little bit more demanding. I also found that babies have a time every afternoon where they're more demanding. And, you know, my girlfriend who had several babies, she said, yeah, you can put the clock to them. It starts at about 4:30 in the afternoon and goes to about 7:30 at night. Some babies cry a lot at that time. Some babies just need to be held a little bit more. So this brings us to a situation called colic, where the baby seems to have an upset stomach. And what the Nursing Mothers Association suggests, and I have found the same thing, is that milk, dairy can upset a baby, and also wheat, the hybridised wheat of today. So often eliminating those foods can be a happier baby. Cooked cabbage, cooked onions, you know, there's some things that can upset some babies' stomachs. One of my babies, she was my 3rd baby, I could not eat muscatel grapes. That was a strange one, but every time I ate muscatel grapes, I was walking the floor with the baby that night, so I just kept away from muscatel grapes. So sometimes there's a little bit of that, a little bit of adjusting the diet to see what works. My niece, she's prone to having seizures, so she's on a very strict diet, which is no dairy, no oats, no wheat, no refined sugar. And she's able to manage her situation, but she has the happiest babies. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Because she's having none of those foods. Her babies didn't know colic, her babies were very placid. And if a baby has eczema, so the rash on the skin, I always investigate. So if a baby has eczema, the things I ask was the baby vaccinated? Because some mothers have told me the skin was perfectly fine till they had their 4-month vaccine, and then they got the rash. So if the baby hasn't been vaccinated, I go one step further. What is the environment? One mother told me that she discovered, because asthma and eczema are very similar, both allergies, her baby went from eczema to asthma, and often that can happen. And what she discovered was the mattress in the cot. She took it out one day when she was cleaning. There was black mold under it. And she did not realise that behind the wall there was a leaking tap, and the carpet was such a colour that you couldn't tell, actually, that underneath the carpet was black mold. So as soon as she got the baby out of that environment, the baby started to clear. So it's a matter of investigating and finding out why. So if there's no exposure to chemicals, there's no exposure to mold, and the baby has not been vaccinated, then we go one step further. And one lady, her baby was 10 months old, covered in eczema, and the baby was just breastfed. So then we look at what the mother's eating. And so we talked about these 5 allergens a few times, dairy. So I said to her, stop the dairy, stop the wheat, and we looked at the changes they've done to the wheat, stop the oats. And tomorrow, I think it's tomorrow, we're looking at the acid-alkaline balance, where I'll be discussing lectins. And oats are very high in lectins, and they can increase inflammation in the body. Peanuts are commonly contaminated with mold, so they're best eliminated. And refined sugar just feeds any problem. So she stopped these foods. After 1 month, she wrote back to me and she said, Barbara, the eczema is still bad. I said, 1 more month. So you can have a slice of bread, it'll be out of your body in 24 hours, but the effect can remain for 2 months. Some people have tried eliminating but haven't given it long enough. She said, okay. What do you do if the baby's got, scratching? Scratching just compounds the whole problem. Ice. And when you put it on the baby's arm, after a few seconds, it could hurt. Say, take it off, and you laugh. If you smile, guess what? The baby smiles. And then so it's usually 7 seconds on, 7 seconds off. You can do it to yourself. 7 seconds on, 7 seconds off, 7 seconds on. Have a little game, laugh with the baby, tickle the baby while you're doing it. But eventually, it's usually after maybe 5-7 minutes, that whole area will be cooled down. You see, scratching makes it hotter, and then the itch gets worse, and then the skin breaks, and then we've got a big problem. So ice. And sometimes if you ice it, there can be relief for even a couple of hours. At exactly 2 months, this mother with the 10-month-old baby covered in eczema, she sent me a photo of the baby, totally clear. Totally clear. So I was very happy when a lady told me that her daughter took her grandson to a paediatrician with eczema, and the paediatrician said, stop these foods. They're common allergens. I was so happy to hear that, because many paediatricians will put the baby on cortisone. Cortisone is very dangerous for a developing baby because You see, our adrenal glands release cortisol. That's our own natural cortisone. So if a baby is given cortisone, it can interfere with the development of their adrenal glands and their own cortisol. And so I've seen many babies totally recover from asthma doing that. So again, you put your detective hat on and investigate the things that may be contributing to it. And so the milk continues. But what if the mother cannot feed? Cannot feed because maybe she has to go back to work, maybe she's highly stressed. Because the fact is that 98% of women could feed. One lady said to me, Barbara, my milk is so thin, I don't think my milk's good enough. I said, your milk is perfect. Did you hear that? Perfect. Even a woman who is a drug addict and living on Coke and white bread, even her milk it's not the best milk, but it's still going to feed that baby. It's still going to feed that baby. Do you know who suffers if the woman is like that? The woman herself. Her bones will start to deteriorate, her hair will fall out, her teeth will start to deteriorate. Her baby will get the cream. So that's what you've got to remember. The baby gets the best. So if a woman is not eating nourishing food, the baby doesn't suffer, she suffers. But we have found in the Nursing Mothers Association, when I say many paediatricians, I'd have to say that it's probably a very small percentage. They also have found the same things that I have seen from helping mothers for over 40 years now, that when those foods are eliminated, then the eczema and the asthma in the baby start to clear. So I have some mothers say, but the baby's got a cold, what do I do? So the first thing I say is, babies all over the world since time dot have got colds. But it's hard with your new baby to see the baby with a cold. And those colds are an important part of strengthening the baby's immune system. That's how they strengthen their immune system. And if the baby has a fever, what do? Let the baby have a fever. Now, when my babies had a fever, that is the time I would put them on the breast more, because I want them well hydrated. The only time a baby may convulse, and that's what I think a lot of parents fear, what if my baby convulses? They will only convulse if they're dehydrated. And beauty of breastfed babies is they take the breast for comfort, because it's such a comfort for them to suckle. So when they're sick, what do they want to do? They want to suckle, they want to feed. So even though I used to feed my babies on an average about every 2 to 3 hours, when they were sick, I just put them on whenever they want. I just put them on the breast because I wanted them very well hydrated. So what if they're bottle fed? Still, the sucking is a comfort thing. And what you might want to do when they're bottle fed, and ideally the best milk for babies is organic soy or goat's milk, because the goat's milk's very close to human milk. Just look at the size of the goat and the size of the human. That tells you. One of the reasons I was banned in Australia is from doing exactly what I just did. If a woman can't breastfeed, then give the baby goat's milk. Do you know what the claim is? That I'm very dangerous because the goat's milk may be lethal. I'll leave it up to you. And by the way, no baby has yet died from goat's milk. That's the craziness. That's the craziness of the claims. But I'm so glad that there's a big world out there, and I can speak to other countries. So what some choose to do, and I know in Australia you can get a goat formula. I've got a few of my grandbabies were raised on goat's milk. So goat's milk or organic soy, they're probably the closest to breast milk. And when a baby's sick, a great thing to give a baby is coconut water. I didn't give it to my babies because all they wanted was the breast. But for bottle-fed babies, this can be a great option when they're sick, where they've got a cold. And in the islands, they call it boo juice. And boo juice is the milk from the immature coconut. And I was speaking in Fiji once, and I said, I wouldn't be surprised if you could even raise a baby on this boo juice. And after the lecture, a lady came running up to me and she said, my girlfriend, she's 45, she was born on a far island in Fiji, her mother died in childbirth, and there were no women on the island. So what the men did, they climbed the coconut tree and got the green, or the immature coconut. See, with the immature coconut, the lining is a thin white jelly, so the nutrients are all in the water. But when the coconut ages, then the water is, they almost throw it away. It's very thin, and all the nutrients are now in that thick white coating. And they grate that white coating and they squeeze it with water. There's the coconut cream or milk that you buy in the tins. So I'm not talking about that, I'm talking about the boo juice, which is the immature coconut water. And I know, I'm sure you can here in Australia, you can buy coconut water. And it's the coconut water, so that's what you can give. You buy it in little long life containers, the coconut water. So that's great to give babies when they're sick, if they're bottle-fed babies, put that in their bottle. And they like it because it's just a little sweet. And I have a friend who's a doctor, she's a Fijian doctor, her name's Lawata Mazandoli, and she came to our retreat to work with me to learn simple natural treatments. They call her the nutritional doctor now. And she raised all her babies on boo juice because she was still studying medicine when she was having some of her babies, so her husband minded the babies. So she did breastfeed a little bit and she expressed a little bit, but her babies, half of the milk they had was boo juice. And when I was in Samoa about 5 years ago, I met a lady who had a baby and she was feeding the baby boo juice. She said, that's all my baby has is boo juice. So the boo juice is the immature coconut, and it's the liquid or the water in the immature coconut. And I know when you go on holidays to those islands, you know, they always have the green coconuts there. If you've been to Thailand, and they have a straw in there because it's a very popular drink, it's just so delicious. So that's a great added, you know, when the babies are sick, or my daughter, if she was going out and she's breastfeeding a baby and she was going to be more than 4 hours, then her husband would give the baby the boo juice, the immature coconut juice. In the war, they used to transfuse with that juice sometimes because it's so high in nutrients. And you can raise a baby on it. So I found that very interesting. The cow's milk is not the best milk for babies, unless you're a Maasai baby, because it's in their heritage. So when should you feed a baby? And there's a lot of controversy about this, especially because the authorities today are claiming that you must give a baby food. You must start giving a baby food from 6 months of age, because the second 6 months of life, breast milk doesn't have as much iron in it as the first 6 months. And if you don't supplement with iron or give the baby food, then the baby will suffer, it will not develop properly, and the brain will not develop. And so once again, why would a mother supplement with food? It's through fear. But remember Psalm 146, put not your trust in princes. Who are the princes? The authorities. Did God make a mistake? No. God does not make mistakes. Now, if you look at the growth of a baby in the first 6 months and the growth of the baby in the second 6 months, they grow much more in that first 6 months compared to the second 6 months. And so God put more iron in breast milk in the first 6 months and in the second 6 months for a reason. So please don't believe them. Put not your trust in princes. Happy is he that hath the God of Jacob as his help, who made heaven and earth, the sea, us, who made the body, who created the milk to be perfect for the baby. So when should a baby eat? 3 things have to be present. 3 things have to be present for a baby to be able to eat. And before we look at those 3 things that must be present, I just want to make a comment. When I used to let my baby feed every hour sometimes when the baby had a fever, a couple of days later I had so much milk. Some ladies say, I don't have enough milk. I say, well, feed the baby more for a couple of days. Just stick them on every half hour, stick them on every hour, just for a couple of days, and your supply will increase, because it's just demand and supply. And unfortunately, as soon as a mother starts giving formula or supplementing her breast milk, that's less sucking at the nipple. So what does that equal? Less milk. And my daughter Emma, she had twins, and she breastfed those twins for 2.5 years, and she did not give the twins any food till they were 16 months old. We'll look at why that is in a minute. So this one little lady made all that milk. She'd be driving along in the car and she had this big 2-quart bottle with a straw in it. She had to drink a lot. She'd drink and drink because she was making so much milk. So remember, with breast milk, it's just demand and supply. After a couple of days, because the baby wasn't feeding as much, everything will settle down a little bit. So what 3 things have to be present for a baby to eat food? Number 1, the baby should be able to sit. But that's not enough. If a baby's lying on their back, it defies reason to give them food, because we need to be sitting to allow gravity to digest our food. Doesn't matter with breast milk. I mean, they're babies, they can't sit up yet because it's all liquid and it digests very, very quickly. Number 2, they should be able to feed themselves. Now, babies are starting to put things in their mouths. I look at the little baby up there that's 4 months old, and he's starting to put things in his mouth, but that's not enough. He can't sit yet. So they must be able to sit, they must be able to feed themselves, put things in their mouth, and the third one, and those 2 are not enough, the baby must have teeth. Now, is that common sense? And when a baby's 6 months old, most babies can't sit by then. They can put things in their mouths, but they have no teeth. Very occasionally, a baby might teeth early. But the first teeth that come, they're 8 teeth. That's 4 at the top and 4 at the bottom. And they're given a name, and that name is milk teeth. Traditionally, those first 8 teeth are called milk teeth. And you know why? Because that's all babies should be having. Milk. Milk. That's all they should be having is milk. But it's also taste time. Because around 8 months, they're certainly sitting, a couple of teeth have come, they can feed themselves. So what you give them is a piece of cucumber, a big hunk of cucumber, or a celery stick, or the stalk of cabbage leaf, or the stalk of a lettuce leaf, or a piece of apple. Maybe a ripe banana, but they'll make a big mess. And I watched my grandson Lennox, 10 months, sitting in his little chair, because they're very social, they like to sit and eat when we sit and eat. And he's sitting there with a piece of cucumber, and by the end of the meal, I think he had 2 at the top and 2 at the bottom, and by the end of the meal, there are little bits of cucumber all on his tray. There's little bits of cucumber all around the floor. It's like a little rabbit. In, in, in. That's how they learn to chew. That's where they learn to chew. That's why the first food should be raw food. Piece of apple, piece of pear. Don't peel it. But won't they choke? They'll gag, but they won't choke. What's gagging? A lot of noise, and out it comes, and they go back to eating again. The children that choke are children who've been raised on slop. Everything's puree. So they don't learn to chew. So when they're 2.5, 3, they're given a piece of apple and they don't chew and get stuck. That's silent. That can be very scary. So they're the children that are more likely to choke, is the children that have not learnt to chew. It's very important for the development of jaw. It's very important for the development of teeth, of gums, of tongue, is chewing. Chewing. So I never peeled an apple. I didn't even core an apple. So a little 2-year-old, just give them a whole apple. They'll work it out. Is that right? And often they'll spit out the bits of skin. That's all right. That's all right. Those gums and those teeth, they need to learn to chew. So I never made baby food. I never made it. And I had an experience. And that experience was that I had hepatitis when my first baby was born. She was born early. I couldn't breastfeed her because I had hepatitis. So I expressed every 3 hours for 5 weeks. Finally, I could have my baby home. She was only 4.5 pound born. And she didn't know how to feed because she'd had the bottle. So I kept expressing. I was only 23 and giving her the bottle. And then a girlfriend visited. She said, "Throw the bottle away, Barbara. When she's hungry, she'll learn how to get the milk out of that breast." And she eventually latched on. And she was only just starting to feed. I got her home when she was 5 weeks old. When she was 8 weeks old, she went blue in the middle of the night. We rushed her down to hospital. She had whooping cough. She didn't get my colostrum. You see, the best protection a baby can have is colostrum. Remember the calves that don't get that colostrum? They never will. I think that's why my little one got whooping cough. She was hospitalised for 6 weeks. She got to the point of spasming without coughing. They said she's the worst case they'd seen. And I remember one day I came, after breakfast, I came down and I saw a male nurse there with his arms folded and my heart sank. He just resuscitated my baby. Ooh. He'd gone into the ward and there were all the cots there and there. And he looked up and he saw Emma's arm going like this. I mean, she's an 8-week-old baby. And he was perplexed because Emma just lay there. The only time she moved was when she coughed. And he ran over and her face was blue. And they gave her mouth to mouth and he revived my baby. After that, I sat next to my baby. They said, "Barbara, we're going to get a special. You go and have a rest." My baby was hardly having any milk. And when she was 4 months old, she was finally discharged. She was 7 pound. That's how, but her head was big. She looked a bit weird because she was obviously bigger. And they said to me, "You must put the baby on the bottle," because I was hardly getting any milk out. And I had a book called The Womanly Heart of Breastfeeding. And I kept reading that book, and the book said, the more you put the baby on the breast, the more milk will become. So that's what I did. I just kept putting that baby on the breast, putting the baby on the breast. I'd expressed for 5 weeks before I had my baby. I wasn't going to give up now. So I had baptism by fire with my baby. And I've got a picture of Emma at 8 weeks of age, just, didn't look like a healthy baby. And then I've got a picture of her 1 month later. She was a fat little baby in 1 month, and that was just my breast, just my breast. But one of the reasons I'm telling you that story, and that's another story of how you can build that milk up. But before I tell you what my main reason for that, I was in Papua New Guinea and in Papua New Guinea I'm giving meetings, and before I started, a 50-year-old woman came and she had a little baby about 9 months old on her hip, and I said, "Your baby?" And she said, "No, it was a street girl's baby." She said, "In Papua New Guinea, if a girl gets pregnant, she gets thrown out onto the streets. So I've taken her baby and I'm raising her baby." I said, "Okay." And then I'm lecturing and I look over and this woman is breastfeeding that baby. I had to stop staring. So I went up later and I said, "You're breastfeeding that baby?" She said, "Yes." She said, "When I first got the baby, I had to supplement a bit, but I just kept putting the baby on my breast, kept putting my baby on the breast." She said, "Now I'm fully breastfeeding the baby." This woman's in her 50s. Now, if a woman who in her 50s, and it's 30 years since she had a baby, can breastfeed a baby, wow, ladies. And please hear this message. If a woman says, "I have to supplement, I don't have enough milk," what's the message? Keep putting it on, keep putting it on. But shouldn't we keep gaps between feeding baby? As a rule. But sometimes only 24 hours and that milk builds up. Every time the baby's hungry, stick it on, stick it on, stick it on. That stimulation will bring more milk, more milk. So the reason I told you about my first baby was I got to know the male nurse. And the male nurse was in charge, I'm 23, he's about 38. He was in charge of the malabsorption syndrome ward in Camperdown Children's Hospital, biggest children's hospital in Sydney. And the only reason he was in the ward that day, and I think it was God, and I didn't know God at this point, that the fact that he went down that corridor just when my baby was going blue, I mean, if it had been 5 minutes later, my baby would have been dead, was he was doing an extra shift on that ward. They were short. That's the only reason he was there. So I got to know him very well. Oh, you can imagine why this man saved my baby's life. He said, "I'm in charge of the malabsorption syndrome ward at Camperdown Children's Hospital." He said, "This ward is full of babies who've been given starch too soon." So when I was 23, I heard about the fact that it's not till the first molars come through, and there are 4 of them. So you've got 4 here, 4 here, then you've got eye teeth, but it's the molars that come through before the eye teeth. So there are 4 molars, first molars, they're 4. And those 4 molars, when they're fully through, then the glands in the mouth produce ptyalin. And ptyalin is a salivary amylase that breaks down starch. So this male nurse told me this in 1976. He said, "This ward is full of babies with malabsorption syndrome in the gut because they've been given starch before the molars are through." So what's happening today, mothers are told, and by the way, if this lecture went up on YouTube, probably YouTube would take it down within half an hour because of what I'm saying. Because of what I've said on vaccines, what I've said on the goat's milk, and what I'm saying now. Anyway, we thank God for Rumble, is that right? Yes. We just can put it up on there. Because these are very controversial issues. But to me, they defy reason. So a mother's told, give your baby rice cereal, is that right? That's one of the first things they're told. Give the baby rice cereal at 6 months. And I have to tell you, there's not a lot of iron in rice cereal, but that's their reasoning, is that breast milk doesn't have enough iron in the second 6 months of life. But if a baby's given rice cereal at 6 months, these molars, so these teeth come through anywhere between 7 to 12 months. You know, and every few weeks another little one will pop out. Whereas the molars, they come through anywhere between 14 and 22 months of age. That's when the first molars come through. And when the molars are fully through, then And only then do the glands in the mouth release ptyalin. And it is ptyalin that breaks down starch. One lady said to me, "But Barbara, where's the science?" Well, go to any anatomy and physiology book and read it for yourself. And did you know that babies have only been fed food in the last 100 years? Before that, babies were never fed food. And yet the mothers are told if you don't give the baby some iron, the baby won't develop properly in the brain, the body. Let's have a look at history. Let's have a look at Mozart, Rembrandt, Galileo, Einstein. What does this history tell us? All these brilliant people, Abraham Lincoln, they were not fed food until sometimes they were 2 years of age. So I heard this in 1976 when my first baby was only 4 months old. So I never gave my babies food because of this. Now, not every baby that gets starch at 6 months is going to get malabsorption syndrome to the point that they need to be hospitalised, but it can certainly set up a gut problem. And how many children do have that? And if a mother starts to feel bad now because she's vaccinated her children, she's given them the rice cereal at a young age, you know what I say to them? You are not allowed to beat yourself up over this because you did not know. And God winks at our ignorance. You can't be held accountable for something you did not know. And you can Google my name, Barbare O'Neil, what shall I feed my baby, and you'll hear this lecture. Or I never use notes, so it's always a little bit different. But you'll see the basic. So my second son, James, not interested in food at all until he was 16 months of age. He's running around. The molars are just starting to come, but he's not interested in food. Maybe at a meal he'd suck on a bit of cucumber, but he just was not interested. Do you ever see that today? Oh, it's rare, isn't it? It's rare. Whereas my fourth child, Julia, she was grabbing at everything that we were eating. She just wanted. But I still would only give her cucumber or apple or banana. And maybe by about 12 months of age, I'd sit them down at their high chair and I'd steam a bit of cauliflower, I'd steam a bit of broccoli, I'd steam a bit of carrot. And the child sees the colour. The child feels the texture. The child feels and tastes the different tastes. And yet when all the vegetables are mashed up together, the child don't know what they're eating. And when it's all mashed up together, what is it now? Slop. It makes no sense. It defies reason. So what I would do, I would sit my little one on my lap and I'd be eating my meal and I'd put near them a bit of cucumber, maybe a bit of tomato, and they'd reach and taste it for themselves. You know, the best thing you can teach children is to be independent, to feed themselves. And you know, the beauty of them using their hands is if it's hot, their hand will tell them before they put it into their mouth. I had a meal with a family that's living on our property at the moment, and they're African. And I noticed that 3 little boys, and all those little boys, one was, I think, 5, 7, and 9. They're the 3 little boys. They all ate with their hands. And the father said, do you mind if the children eat with their hands? I said, not at all, I love it. And they weren't messy, and they had these teff wraps, and they'd pull off a little bit and scoop it up and eat it. They can tell when it's hot. Because you try and give a baby a spoon, I used to notice, you know, even at 18 months old, and they put the spoon in and then put it up to their mouth and turn it up and everything falls out. Have you noticed? So it's great when they get very proficient eating with their hands. And then as they get a little bit more proficient, they can use the spoon. It's such an easy way to feed children. It's so easy. A girl said to me, Barbara, my first child, I was told I had to mash up all these vegetables, and I'd mash them all up, cook them all up, mash them together, freeze them in little bits, and wherever I went I'd have my little container, and then, you know, the baby's lying down and you put it in the mouth. And have you noticed, if you give a baby mashed up vegetables or rice cereal, when you put it in the mouth, it pops straight back out? Have you noticed? Do you know why? Because when a baby sucks at the nipple, they use their tongue and their top lip, like that. That's how they suck. So you put slop in there, they go like that, and what happens to it? Just pops straight out. That's why. And my girlfriends used to say, Barbie, just scoop it up and put it back in. Keep scooping it up and putting it back in. And I thought, well, that makes no sense at all to me. Makes no sense at all. So this mother that said to me, my first baby, I had to mash up all these vegetables and take them, and oh, what a mess, you know, the food keeps coming out. She said, this baby I'm doing the way I've heard you say. And it's so easy. It's so easy. So all you take when you're travelling and you got a little 18-month or a little 2-year-old, you know, all you've got is a banana. Oh, bananas are so easy. And they can hold them in their hand and eat them away. It's just so easy. So you never have to do anything. So my daughters, they all raise their children like this, and I have 23 grandchildren now. And hopefully any day the first great-grandchild will be born. And you know what my daughter Julia, her friends used to say, you're just being lazy. You're just being lazy, not making baby food. Oh dear, we laughed. I mean, a mother's life is busy. She's got this little one, and when the little one's not well, it takes a lot. You can hardly put the baby down, but guess what? The clothes keep building up in the laundry, and the dishes still have to be done. So if you can make life as easy as possible for the mother, how nice. It's such an easy way to feed children. When the molars are fully through, then basically they can just about eat anything. And if you've taught them to chew, they can even chew nuts. Did you hear that? Nuts. Now what I used to do when the molars are just coming through, I would chew the nut up. I would spit it into my fingers and I'd put it in the little one's mouth. I would do it when the molars are coming there. And I remember my little granddaughter, Amy, she'd run up to me, this is at the meal, because I only fed them at mealtime. And she'd give me a nut and I'd chew it, and she'd stand there like this, waiting for me to chew it. And then she put her little mouth up and I'd pop that little chewed up nut in. What have I also done? I've mixed it with my enzymes in my mouth to make it a little easier. But still, I would not do that until the molars start to come through. And now you know why my daughter Emma, her twin girls who just turned 19, they were 16 months and running around and they'd never had food. And they were good size. I saw photos of them the other day. She sent some photos because they've just turned 19. You know, when they have a birthday, often they send baby photos out. Oh, their chubby little legs and arms and standing up next to a tree. They certainly didn't suffer. My daughter had to drink a lot of water though. That's why she had this bottle and she made this lid that you could put a straw in it. So she's driving along drinking out of this big bottle. And she ate well. Of course you have to eat well. But if you don't eat well, the only person that'll suffer is you. Her hair didn't fall out. Her teeth didn't fall out. She remained strong and healthy because she was eating very well. So what do you feed the two-year-old? Exactly what you eat. Our children had exactly what we had. There was no different. We made no special food. And something that I think that you should never do is to say before breakfast, what would you like for breakfast, sweetheart? Do you know what you do? You serve the meal. And then the child has a choice. They can have chopped pear or chopped banana on their millet porridge. Or they can have coconut milk or organic soy milk on their porridge. And on their toast they can have olive oil, or they might like avocado. So there's the choices. And choices empower children. Then they're able to make those decisions. But we always served the salad first and the raw food first. So I'll give you an experience of my son Peter. My son Peter, everything had to be just right. And a lot of my 2-year-olds, if they cried at the table, then they'd have to go out, because something will go wrong at the table. And so if they cried, they always had to go out. If they stopped crying, then they could come back and finish the meal. Because there was to be no fuss at the table, because you can't digest when you've got a screaming child at the table. And if you only feed them 3 times a day, twice a day, they're hungry. So Peter, he'd like his porridge, and he'd like the honey in the middle of his porridge, and then he'd cut up the banana. But if a piece of banana fell into the honey in the middle, he'd cry. Out. Shut the door. Are you going to be a good boy now? No. Okay, shut the door. A few minutes later, are you going to be a good boy now? Okay, please come back. That banana's still sitting in that honey. We can just put it to the side. One day, it was about 4 or 5 times he cried. The milk went in the wrong spot, or everything went wrong. Out. So by the time we'd finished breakfast, Peter hadn't eaten a lot. And I knew that he was going to be hungry. So we'd have breakfast at 7:30. I'd feed them very well, and then we'd have lunch at 2. So I know Peter's 3. Peter's going to be hungry. What am I going to do? And if I feed him mid-morning, he's not going to eat much lunch. And if he doesn't eat his lunch, then he's going to be hungry mid-afternoon. You see, it throws the whole thing out. And I wasn't interested in being in the kitchen all day. And so, yes, just as I suspected, 10 o'clock, Mom, I'm hungry. And I don't say to him, well, you should have eaten your breakfast. You shouldn't have made No. They're not stupid. Okay? He knows all that. So I say, have some water. Have some salt and some water. Well, that helps for about an hour. Then he comes back in, I've drunk lots of water. All right, if you sit very, very still, you can have half a glass of boo juice or soy milk or carrot juice, but it takes a lot to make the carrot juice. And that was a real special, but he has to sit very closely on the chair. And I know that for a 3-year-old stomach, that'll settle it for a while. So it's 1:30. Mom, I'm hungry. All right, if you sit very still, you can have a carrot. I don't let them run round and eat. I don't let them run round and drink. If they want to run round, you take it off them. You can only have it if you sit. All right, I say, if you sit very still, you can have a carrot. You make out it's a great honour that you're giving them a carrot. And he sits there. How long does it take a 3-year-old to eat a carrot? Long time. So by the time lunch is ready, he's maybe through the carrot, depends how hungry he was. Maybe he's 3/4 through the carrot. And then the meal is, and he eats very well. And because he eats very well, because he's so hungry, I don't hear from him for hours. So even if that happened, I still would not give them food, because I know It's going to upset their stomach because their stomachs are the same as ours. It takes 3.5 to 4 hours to digest a meal. And I also noticed that children say they're hungry when they're bored. Have you seen that? You see, my first little girl, Emma, I used to give her a little bowl of raisins. A couple of hours later, I'd give her a piece of apple. And she'd be happy while she had the raisins. She'd be happy while she had the apple. And then not happy. And then it's lunchtime, and she hardly eats a thing. And I thought, this doesn't make much sense at all. So I'm so glad that by the time I had my second child, I'd worked it out. You just feed them at meal times. And you'll find if they eat well, then they don't get hungry for a long time. Ready for the big cry? Oh, she didn't. You know how it goes quiet, then they go, wah! I think she fell over. Father moved fast. So, and we don't mind all these noises because we want the mums to hear this, hey? But every person, if you're way past being a mum or not a mum yet, you will be a mum or you will know mums or you will have grandchildren, etc., etc., etc. And so it's very important information and not often known as you realise. So what do you do when a baby has a fever? Well, the fever has a purpose. So these are a few things to remember because a lot of mothers, you know, nobody likes to see their little ones sick. And when they've got a fever, it's very hard because they're uncomfortable, they're hot, and fear can set in. What if they convulse? None of my babies ever convulsed. And did you know that if a baby does convulse with a fever, there is no record of brain damage? So remember that. So you've got to take your fears to the end. Why do I fear? It's a scary thing to see a baby convulsing, but it is not that common, and it's usually if a baby's... See, you can imagine there's only one part of the body that doesn't like getting hot, and that's the brain. But if the brain is well hydrated, it handles the heat. So some things to remember with the fever. The fever is nothing to fear. It's nothing to fear because it's a process. And it's a process, it's nothing to fear. It has a purpose. So what's the purpose of a fever? Remember this, that fever is your friend. Because it has a purpose. What's the purpose? The purpose is to burn. And what does it burn? It burns any harmful microbes or pathogens that might be in the body. And that's why for centuries fever baths have been used to help people who have cancer, who have serious illnesses. They actually create a fever to burn this out in the body. And I know one theory of Lyme's disease is 30 fever baths in a row for 30 days to burn out those spirochetes. It's your friend. Its purpose is to burn, but there's another purpose, and that is to increase your immune system. Your immune system, your white blood cells are made in your bone marrow, and there are some that are made in your lymph nodes, your lymphocytes. So when you increase body temperature, you increase the bone marrow's ability to make white blood cells. So it increases your immune system. It's a fantastic thing. And natural medicine uses fever baths. We create fever in all of our guests every day with the steam sauna. We have a steam sauna down by the creek, and they come in the steam sauna, and underneath the seats there are copper pipes that release the steam. It's a wood-fired. That's how we say, that's how we keep Howard fit. He's got to chop wood all afternoon. And they get very, very hot in the steam sauna. I try and wait till the perspiration's dripping off my fingers. But we always give our guests a little bucket with cold water and a face cloth or washer just to keep the head cool. And then after about 10 minutes, 15, whatever the person can handle, they run out and dive in the cool creek. Or if they can't run, there's a cold shower there with a big head and douse the body. Then back into the steam. By the third steam, we've brought body temperature up to about 40 degrees. I think that's Celsius. I think 100 is about 42 Celsius. Does anyone know that? 100 degrees Fahrenheit is 42 Celsius. So we're creating a fever. It's your friend because it has a purpose. And remember that water puts the fire out. So what I would do with my babies, I would only do something if they started to get uncomfortable. I certainly would keep them well hydrated. For a little one who's maybe 2 or 3 and not breastfeeding anymore and they've got a fever, let them suck on ice. Anything to get the water into them. And children love sucking on ice, don't they? So anything to get the water into them. So make sure they're very well hydrated. And what else you can do is water on the outside. So there are a few things that I'd like to take you through of what you can do for a fever. And I would only do something if the baby was very hot. I never took their temperature. I never took it. I just felt, and I think, ooh, that's quite hot. I would just compare it against my body. So number 1 is you can just sponge them. And what do I mean by a sponge? You lay the little one on a cloth, maybe a towel, and maybe just their underwear on, just underpants on, cover them with a dry cloth. Take one arm out and get a bowl with cold water, put the face cloth in and just sponge, 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 sponge. There'll be a little bit of water on the skin and that water takes off the heat. And then dry it. And then if you compare that arm to that arm, this one will be cooler. And then do it to an arm, and then do it to a leg, and then do it to the other leg, then do it to their torso, then turn them around and do it on the back. And that'll take maybe 10 minutes, and by then the fever usually has dropped a little bit. Another is a lukewarm bath. Lukewarm is not hot and not cold. A lukewarm bath. Because what water does, water will draw the heat into it. If you put them in a lukewarm bath for 10 minutes, when you take them out, the water will be hotter than when they went in because that water has pulled the heat out. But probably the most powerful is a wet sheet pack. And this is a little bit more work. And remember, one of the problems with a fever is often the body can't get rid of the heat quick enough. And that's why what the water does, it'll take it out. And I remember my daughter told me this. She said her little baby did not want to be put down to be sponged, did not want to be put down into the bath. Baby was about 10 months old. So she did the wet sheet pack. She took all the baby's clothes off and she got a sheet and she wrung it out in water. Even if you do it with warm water, it still gets cold when you spread it out. Wrap the baby in the wet sheet. Wow, baby doesn't like that. And then quickly wrap the baby in a little woolen blanket and hold the baby. Baby's very happy. So then she could cuddle and hold the baby, because that's what the baby wanted. The baby was all wrapped up in the wet sheet. It's only uncomfortable when that wet sheet touches the body, but wrap them up quickly, then it must be a woolen blanket. No other blanket will do it. It must be wool. If ever you see a woolen blanket at a thrift store, grab it. What you can also do, they're hard to get now, is get some old woolen, you call them sweaters, and even undo them and sew them together to make a blanket. Wool is very valuable. Only wool will do it. It can't be any other fabric. If you do it in a cotton, then the cotton gets wet and then the air hits the cotton and there's a chill. So it must be wool. No matter where I am, if I see a woolen blanket, I'll get it. And if I'm travelling and I can't carry it with me, I'll give it to whoever I'm staying with, because they're very valuable. Not a lot of woolen blankets around now. That's your wet sheet pack. So even though it's uncomfortable for the baby when you wrap it in the wet sheet, as soon as you put them in the woolen blanket, as soon as the woolen blanket touches it, it starts to warm up and you hold them. And often they'll fall asleep because that sheet gets hot. Where's the heat come from? Their body. And that can just bring that temperature down. So even though fever has a purpose, sometimes you'll do something just to make it comfortable for them. Yes?
Do you also put anything wet on the baby's head when you have to put the glove on? You can, but often they don't want anything on their head. That's why you keep them, the laugh tells me you know that, keeps them well hydrated. So remember, fever is your friend. It's your friend. Water puts the fire out. And something else to remember, we'll call it trash, we call it rubbish, when all the trash is burnt up, the fire goes out. You see, it won't be there forever. Trash is burnt up, fire goes out. Because that's its purpose, to burn up the rubbish. There's a man and his wife have had a baby, and they're very, very concerned at every single step of this baby. And the baby had a fever. Baby had a fever at 10 months. And the fear. So they went straight to the hospital, and the baby had to have, is it Tylenol? Yeah. And the fever went. And when the Tylenol had worn off, what happens? Fever comes back. This happened 3 times over, I think, 24 hours. And he emailed me, he said, I'm so stressed, I can't sleep, I don't want my baby to have this drug. And I said, fever's your friend. It has a purpose. It's doing something in your baby. It was created by God for a purpose. I said, just sponge the baby. Make sure the baby's well hydrated. He was very scared. But he didn't like what was happening. I said, that fever will keep coming back until it's done its job. In fact, if you don't give the baby the drug and let the fever run its course, it'll be over so much quicker. Anyway, he did it. He was a bit scared, but he did it. And I got an email the next day, the fever's gone. The fever's gone. Sometimes babies get a fever when they're teething, you know. Sometimes you don't quite know why they've got a fever. Sometimes they get a fever when they've got a cold. But whatever the body does, trust the body. Trust the body, that it knows what it's doing. What about if a baby had a cold? Well, colds are wonderful for your immune system. Remember, this is all part of building up your immune system. Do you know what slaughters the immune system? It's vaccinations. Also damages the nerve system because of the neurotoxins in the vaccines. So formaldehyde, did you know that's in the vaccine? Aluminium, there are still neurotoxins in the vaccine. So there are a few things you can do when a baby has a cold. Let's say you've got a little 6-week-old baby that's got a cold, can't feed properly. 1 drop of eucalyptus oil on the fontanelle will help to clear the airways. And that's a great place to put it, because if you put it here and the baby puts it in the eye, you know,
where did you say to put it?
on the fontanelle, which is called the soft spot.
What do you put it there for? I missed that.
If the baby's all stuffed up with a cold, can't breathe, and yet they can't feed because they can't breathe through their nose. And you can't put the eucalyptus oil here, it's too strong, it might burn their lid, but there is easy. It's also important to keep a baby's extremities warm. Always keep the baby's extremities warm. And as soon as it gets a little bit cool, they should have a little bonnet on. In fact, I was saying the ladies, I'm knitting at the moment. I always knitted little booties, I knitted little bonnets, I'm knitting a little cardigan for my grandson out of baby wool. It's very, very soft. It's also important to dress babies in natural fibre. We don't want them to be going through puberty at a young age, and dressing them in the chemical fabrics is one thing that can contribute to that. I remember I was at church one day and my baby Peter, 6 months old, he had a little knitted pants and little knitted top and a little knitted hat. It's all knitted, all wool, wrapped up in a little soft, because baby wool's so soft, knitted thing. And a lady said to me, "Your baby looks so comfortable." She said, "There's another baby over there that's got this nylon dress on and there's nylon things and So make sure baby's only in natural fibre. So there's another thing you can do for a baby, and that is finely slice garlic. But the garlic must never touch the baby's skin, got that? So I would get a cloth, and because I had so many children, the sheets get thin and the sheets start to tear. They're the best cloths for poultices. So you tear them up into little strips. And I would put a fine slice of garlic like that, and then I would put that cloth over that and bind it to the baby's feet. And then I would put a little bootie on. My sister recently, her little grandson had a bad cold and she grated the garlic. She put it in a cloth, but too much juice came out. Within 20 minutes of it being on the baby's feet, the baby's screaming. They quickly took it off and there was a big blister on both feet. She'd burnt the feet. Now it recovers, but you can't put garlic on the feet now for about a week. So never grate it and never let the garlic touch it. Now she'd put it on a cloth, but there was so much juice that came through, it just went straight through to the skin. But I have found the fine slices are perfect. And within 2 minutes of wrapping that on the baby's feet, you can smell it on the breath. So what does the garlic do? Well, we know garlic's a great antibiotic. We know that garlic helps with colds, helps to clear the head. So that's another thing you can do to a little baby. I introduced my children at a young age to raw garlic. Crush the raw garlic up in the mashed avocado, give them a slice of sourdough spelt bread with some olive oil and crushed garlic on that, avocado and tomato, really nice. And I found even 2-year-olds will eat that. So they're little things that you can do. Have you noticed what children will eat? Have you noticed what babies will eat? Recently a mother said to me, "Barbara," she said, "my little crawling baby got a bit of dog dropping and ate it." Do you remember when we looked at the gastrointestinal tract? It's a hollow tube. So it's all right. It's a hollow tube. It's going to go in and come out the other end. My mother-in-law, she was minding 2 little kids, and the little boy's 5, and he brought in some caterpillars, and the little 2-year-old girl went up and ate them. Have you noticed what children will eat? And my daughter found her baby, 10-month-old baby, woke up in the cot next to the window, and there's little lady beetles there, and he's picking them and eating them. They eat dirt. So what happens? What causes a child to become fussy? It's the parent. It's because they're introduced to sugars and ice creams and chocolates and My children didn't even know what those things were. But I used to make dessert a couple of times a week. So I fed them very well. What desserts would I make? Apple pie. Who doesn't like apple pie? Spelt pastry?
Be generous with the oil, it makes it like short crust. Remember, we don't have to be scared of oil anymore. The only oil we need to keep away from is the highly refined altered oils. Stew the apples. I'd have them up at the table with me. I have my grandchildren up at the table. Do I give them knives? Yes. Did you hear that? Yes. Because how do they learn how to use a knife? And I'd say to them, careful, because I don't want blood in the pie, okay? Yes, yes, Nana. Yes, we'll be very careful. I peel the apple, I core the apple, and then they chop it up. Oh, how they love it. You know, the earlier you get them, soon as they can walk, get them to help. Get them to work with you. I've got photographs of me with my grandchildren in the shower. We're all scrubbing. We're all scrubbing. Give them some old toothbrushes. Yeah, but get them between the tiles. Do you know, when you don't teach children to work, you deprive them of the joy of accomplishment. I get them to set the table. So when all the grandchildren are there, they're setting the table. And little Lennox, he's 2, he's putting you call them napkins, we call them serviettes, yeah? Now they're not very neat. They're a bit screwed up. But that's how they start. And now that he's 5, he is allowed to carry the oil to the table. He's very careful, and he's looking at me. And then he puts it up and it pours out. That's all right, that's how he learns. You see, when children don't work, they never learn. That's common sense. You know, when you do a job, things go wrong, isn't that true? And isn't that when we start to think of solutions to remedy what went wrong? That's how they develop common sense. So when my son William got his first job as a landscaper, apprentice landscaper at 15, and he was apprenticed to this big fancy landscaping place. The only way he got the job was the wife, the lady, had done our program, and William took everybody on a walk and showed them which tree was what. And a week later, her landscaping apprenticeship had resigned, so they rang me up and said, would William like an apprenticeship as a landscaper? I think William grew 2 inches that night. The end of the first day, the boss rang me up and said, your son's astounding us. And you know what we're thinking, Will is astounding them? Will's the youngest of 6. You know, and he's never quite what the others could do. And at 15, he looked 12. And they just were going to give him a week because they said, you're so little, you need to be big. He said, I'm strong. So they gave, and at the end of the first day, they just were amazed at this kid. They gave him the apprenticeship. I said, what did you do? He said, well, they wanted me to clean out the van, this dirty old van. He said, I noted where everything was, Mum. He said, I got everything out, I cleaned it really good, and I put everything back the way it had been. And they all came back and looked at the van and went, wow. Now, where did William learn that? It's from this age. That's where you start. So I had a lady say to me one day, she said, Barbara, you must spoil your grandchildren. And I just smiled because I knew she wouldn't like my answer. She said, you must spoil your grandchildren. I said, no. Because what does spoil mean? Ruin something beautiful. Isn't that true? And the grandchildren love coming to our house because when we serve the apple pie, I say to Michael, Lennox and Sophia helped to make this pie. Oh, how do they feel now? But the first slice goes to Pa. And it just amazes me that many people indulge children today. Have you noticed? They treat them as if they're the kingpins. And you know what? After a while, those children think that they're so good they don't have to do anything. Do you know the best thing for children is to be loved, accepted, and part of the family firm. Isn't that right? Part of the family firm. So as soon as they are able, get them to help. They mightn't do a really good job, but that's how it starts.
So when my grandchildren at my house, they love having millet porridge for breakfast and milk, and everyone sets the table, and when it's finished, everyone's clearing the table, and one kid clears the table, 3 dry the dishes, 1 puts away, we do all that. And I noticed little Marky, he's 5, he gets the soy milk and he opens the fridge to put it in the fridge. And I've got my back to him, the fridge is there, I'm washing. And I noticed that he put it in the top shelf of the fridge. And he tried to shut the door, and of course you can't shut the door because the milk's in the top thing. And so what would some people do? No, Marky, put it... What have I done then? Embarrassed Mark, because he did a bit of a silly thing. But you know what I do? I just ignore it. Because you know what he's going to do? He's going to work it out. Isn't that right? And out of the corner of my eye, I'm pretending not to look. I noticed he opened it and put it down and shut it. He now has his reward. Isn't that true? He's worked it out. And what a feeling that is to work it out. So don't deprive them of that. Anyway, I turned around, he looked at me, and I just went and just kept doing the dishes. But something happened one day with little Marky. I think he was only 4. And the table's been set, and I'm still getting a few things on. So what I do is I get the children, I don't give them the sharpest knife in the drawer, but it's still got a bit of sharpness, and they cut the banana. And the porridge has been served. Pa's about to sit down and say grace. I'm getting a few things, and they're chopping their banana, and the little ones aren't very good at it, but that's how they learn. They're chopping it up, and he put a piece of banana in his mouth. And Michael came along and said, "Hey, what have you got in your mouth?" Mark's like this, and he's looking at Pa, and Michael said, "Over there, stand over there." Goes over there and he's like this, banana in his mouth. And he looks at me. Now what do I want to do? "Oh, Michael, it's only a piece of banana." Isn't that what I want to do? But what do I do when I do that? I immediately show disrespect to my husband. And I'm also disrespecting him in front of the grandchildren. Because Mark's the youngest, there are a couple of others, I think there were 4 of them. So they're all watching. What are they watching for? What's going to happen here? Mark looks at me, and I just smile, and I keep putting things on the table. I just let him stand there. Michael comes over, looks at Mark and says, "Okay, you can come over now." Mark comes over. He's like this. We say grace, and then we start eating. And I just smile at Mark. What does the smile say? I love you, and it's all right. And this is just the rules in our home. Well, he never put any banana in his mouth again before we said grace. Just the rule in the home. And someone would say, "Oh, poor little kid," but you know, it's all right. They certainly recover from that. And it's so important, even if you don't agree with your husband, you never, ever show it in front of the children. And it's hard, because I thought to myself, "Oh, come off it, it's only a bit of banana." But I have to think about the ramifications of what I've done. And if I want to talk to Michael later about it, I can, but not in front of anyone else. Did I? No. Because it's just such a little thing. And you know what? Mark was smiling and happy and eating his breakfast not long after that. It does not hurt them. Do you know what hurts them? Is if Michael and I started arguing. That's what hurts them. That's what hurts them. Because life is not easy when they leave home. It's not easy at all. And far better that there be rules in the home, that there be consequences for wrong actions, then life out there is so much easier for them. But when they're totally indulged, never have to do a thing, no rules in the home, that when they go on the job site, the men on the job site, they chew them up like mincemeat and spit them out. And it's really tough. It's really tough. But I'll tell you something else funny. We've got a trampoline. And you know, all the kids are on the trampoline and they hit heads and someone cries. Someone's crying all the time. So I said, righto, that's enough. One at a time. We're just going to have one at a time. One goes on the trampoline. 15 minutes later, they all come in. There's 3 little boys. I guess 5, 7, and the other one's about 11. They say, Grandma, because I'm grandma to these ones. Yes? It's really fun when we all jump on the trampoline together. I said, oh. Can we? And if we get hurt, don't come out. Don't come out. We'll handle it. So what do I say? Okay. So 10 minutes later, I hear a cry. I just look out, and all the kids are going. So I think it's also nice to sometimes give a little, give a little in areas like that. And I thought, oh, well, they can handle it. So I think the main thing with children is to teach them to be as independent as possible, to teach them to work at a very young age, because that is such a valuable skill. And have guidelines in the home. Guidelines so that the children know what they can do and what they can not do. And there's a consequence for every action. Notice from a very young age, if the children cried at the table, they had to go out. Then they quickly learn, I can't cry at the table. If they've got a problem, I would say, I've got a problem with my breakfast. Okay, what's the problem? The banana fell in the honey. Well, let's get it out and put it over there. See, so you're teaching them to have solutions rather than just cry. But of course, a 2 and a 3-year-old will just cry. But Peter was still doing that at 5. Took him a lot longer. And Peter came to me one day when he was 8. He said, Mum, my singlet came through and it was inside out. When you fold the clothes, could you fold it the right way? I said, I'll try, Pete. And then he asked me to fold his shirts by folding the top up and roll from the sleeve to the other sleeve. He had all of these ways that it had to be. Do you know, Peter now was Brisbane's top tiler because he's so fastidious on the way he tiles. So when parents get a little frustrated at these bits that the children do, you know, you see the personality of the child, and you'll see what they're like when they're older. And so one day I looked out the window, and it would be from here, maybe to that tree away, was where the forest started at our house, that tree standing up there. And I looked out the window one day and I saw this blue and red thing like this. I thought, what's that? Then I realised it was my crawling baby, Julia. She's 12 months old and she's crawling into the bush. And I said to Emma, go and get Julia, she's crawling into the bush. What baby's going to crawl into the bush? Well, now my daughter Julia, at the age of 15, she's running whole cooking schools. She's running whole restaurants. You see the character personality you see from a young age. Take heart, because those personality character traits, that's what I think we adults should be doing, is developing the good and also trying to divert the not so good. Isn't that true? What about tantrums? What do you do if a child tantrums? Well, sometimes shutting the door and walking away is enough, because have you noticed no child will tantrum for another child? No child will tantrum in the school playground, because how will the other kids treat them? They'll be ridiculed, they'll be picked on. So a child will only tantrum if they know it's going to get a result. And so my children never tantrumed, and I think it's because I would check them from a very young age. So when my children were breastfeeding and they're toddlers, there were times they could feed and there were times that they couldn't feed. So there were boundaries. And I've seen little toddlers go up to their mother, lift the shirt, feed of this side, feed of that side, in front of everyone. Who's in charge of that feeding program? The child. So the mother, really from a young age, the child should know that the mother, the mother has the one that has the guidelines. And that's why when I minded children, they'd all come in and they'd look at the sultanas and the dates. Can I have a date? I'd say, yes, after your lunch. And they'd go out smiling, but they didn't get what they wanted. But you smile. But I want a date now. Do you? Well, the date's not available till after your lunch. When you've eaten all your vegetables, you can have a date. You can have a glass of water now. Smile. Smile. Know what the smile says? I love you. But you can't have the date right now. I want a date now. And let's say they throw themselves on the ground and have a tantrum. Well, you just pick them up, they're tantruming, and put them out, and then get a bucket of cold water. They'll stop straight away. It's a wonderful tonic, is cold water. That was cold. Yes, you were getting a little bit hot under the collar, so I just thought I'd calm you down. But I'm all wet. Yes, so I see. I'll get you a towel and you can change. Now wring your clothes out and hang them out to dry. Can you see that? You keep calm at every step. How does the mother keep calm? She makes sure she eats well. She makes sure that she keeps well hydrated. She makes sure she goes to bed early. And isn't it a temptation for mothers to stay up and do all their cleaning in the evening? No. Better to have a house that's a little bit messy and a well-slept mother. And the mother must make sure she eats well. And that's why it's important to sit at the table. Get all the children to help with setting the table so that when you sit, you can just sit. So all that is very important. And also the discussion with the mother and father that they're united in what they do with their children. Are there any questions? How early can you give a baby water? Whenever. If it's a very hot climate, you might start giving the baby water from a young age.
But it's never harmful. It's never harmful.
No, it's not harmful. And it just amazes. Some people say, well, it might be harmful. What about the injection that the baby was given at 1 day old?
Yes.
Huh? Let's talk about harmful.
Yes.
So in hot climates, I think it doesn't hurt for the baby to have a little bit of water. It's good to get them used to water because it's not sweet like breast milk.
It always seemed crazy people would have a baby and they would say, my doctor said I can't give the baby water. And I'm like, but how can you not give a baby water? I don't understand.
And remember, they've got hydrochloric acid. So if they're, we're not going to give them water out of a dirty creek. There's a bit of common sense there. Yes?
At what point with a fever do you start to implement the intervention?
At what point do you start doing something about a fever? When the child looks uncomfortably hot, that's when I would do something. If they're sleeping, great, just let them sleep, but maybe loosen the clothes around them and make sure, again, the number one thing is hydration. Make sure they're well hydrated. Yes?
I may have missed part of it when you were talking, but the introduction of starchy foods like brown rice and things like that for babies, are you waiting until all
The first 4 molars are through. So you've got 8 here, you've got 8 here, you've got your eye teeth, and then you've got your molars. And the question is, when do you introduce the starches, the rices, the potatoes, the breads, the cereals? When the when the 4 molars are fully through. When the 4 molars are fully through, then the glands release ptyalin, and ptyalin is the salivary amylase that breaks down starch. Yeah?
When a baby's too young to blow their own nose, do you think the suction is good for them, or do you think it could bring bacteria?
Oh, well, I never did it, but you'll find that when you get a tissue and you pull, it usually pulls it out. And you know what they usually do? We used to call it green sleeves. And, you know, it's a very exciting day when the little 18-month or 2-year-olds can actually blow their nose. But, yeah, it's not a big deal. Some of them snort, not a big deal, but it just comes out the other end. Yeah? Yeah?
What do you think about breastfeeding, continuing breastfeed while pregnant? He's over a year old, the pediatrician said he should probably start milk now, since I am pregnant. So
How old's the baby?
how old is he? A year, a little over a year.
Okay.
Just turned a year.
Okay, well, I breastfed 3 months into every one of my pregnancies. And I remember I had a 9-month-old baby when I fell pregnant. So when she was 12 months old, she sat up and spat out the milk. And I knew that the milk had changed a bit. So she was the only baby, and I had her on soy milk, which was an organic soy. But I do know some ladies who have breastfed all the way through, not a problem, not a problem. Many women have done that, and in many cultures they would do that. Because, again, the teeth dictate how much food you can give your little toddler. Yes?
Do you know anything about the frequency of clothing fabrics, like organic cotton versus polyester, and how it affects babies?
It is a subject, and even if it's not organic cotton, as long as you wash it and hang it on the line, you know, you can purify it. But what I have read about the frequencies in the synthetic fibres is that they attract more chemicals because of the frequencies they have. So it is true that natural fibre is best for baby. And I also read an article where they said that when a baby breathes out, it doesn't breathe out very far. And if everything around the baby is nylon or acrylic or polyester, you don't get a dispersing of their air, and they start to breathe in more of their own waste. And they claim that it was a contributing factor to cot death. But there's one main thing that is called cot death, and that's been very well proven, and that is the vaccinations. Yes?
Yes. I might have missed it. Did you talk about mother's milk? The celery and the carrot?
Well, when we talk about the mother, if the mother cannot feed, the goat's milk or the organic soy milk, or what the Fijians do is the coconut juice. But I did talk about it in another lecture, and it's not as common, and it's a lot more work, is the 80% carrot juice, 10% apple juice, and 10% celery. That's called the vegetarian's milk. And only once have I seen a mother give that to her baby, and it's when her baby had a major skin problem. But I do know as a mother, to get the juicer out and to juice it, that's a lot of work. But it is an option. Yes?
Is there anything you can do for your children if you've already given them vaccines?
Is there anything you can do for your children if you've already given them vaccines? The very best thing you can do is to feed them well and to give them the balanced diet, which is high fibre, lots of fruits and vegetables, great proteins, ideally legumes every day, and also the fats, the good fats, the olive oils, because they all protect the nerve cell. And your body naturally, when you give it the right conditions, does detoxify. Some nuts better than others. We don't use peanuts, and we're looking at the acid alkaline tomorrow, and the almond and the Brazil are the two alkaline nuts. But then again, your walnut is very high in omega-3, so
all your nuts give different things. The only nut I don't eat is peanut. Yes?
When it comes to children and nut allergies, is there anything that you can do to aid the process to reduce the amount of allergic reaction that they could have to it?
What I have found is when these foods are eliminated, then the allergies are eliminated. So I've had people say to me, since I've reduced that or stopped that food, I don't have an allergy to pollen anymore. Since I've stopped those foods, I don't have a cat allergy anymore. I don't have a horse allergy anymore. I don't have a dust mite allergy anymore. So it again gets back to the food we eat. But people that love that food, it's much easier to blame the pollen and the dust mite than to stop the food. But I think it's quite easy today. You know, there's lots of alternatives to dairy. There's the simple needs bread. There's the enkenhorn and spelt. There's the millet and rice that you can use. There's so many nuts. And apparently this is maple syrup country, is that right? So maple syrup's delicious sweetener, yeah?
I'm sorry, with the oats, does it take as lengthy of a time as you were saying in regard to the wheat, even though it takes 2 days to climb the body, will it still have the effects after a long while as well with the oats?
With some people it does, yeah. Yeah. Okay, we've just about solved all the children's problems in the world, is that right? Well begun. So I look forward to seeing you all this afternoon, and this afternoon we're going to look at osteoporosis. And looking at osteoporosis, we'll also cover teeth, because they're the only exposed bone. So I look forward to seeing you tonight, this afternoon.